Hi. I want to talk about something I don't think I've talked about yet. And I always look to the side. I want to talk about bipolar and kind of the basis of my personal experience with it and things to look out for. I guess I'm just kind of gonna go on a tangent and see where it goes. Basically, about 2 days ago, I got out of a really bad cycle. And if you don't know what a bipolar cycle is, it is basically when somebody goes from their normal balance to either up and down or down and up, or basically the cycle is the manic or hypomanic down to the depressive. And then you go back to your baseline, usually. But the length of cycles, varies and everything. I was actually doing a little reading on it, and the statistics of people who were diagnosed with bipolar and asked to rate their, impairments, the majority of people, like 84%, I think, or something like that, describe themselves as severely impaired compared to moderately impaired. Which I have to agree with, especially if you're not medicated. Now, I am a medicated person. Is my medication right? I don't know. I survive with it, and I'm okay with that. And I've gone through like 3 or 4 medications just for my depression and ADHD to try something new, and it was horrible. I did not enjoy that. Those really messed with my brain. So, I think you can understand my apprehension to trying something else for my most severe mental illness, which bipolar is. Like, as a person who, I've talked about this, is autistic, has ADHD, has Tourette's syndrome, and has bipolar, if I could pick to get rid of any of those things, it'd be the bipolar. Everything else is fairly manageable. But there's something about bipolar disorder that is completely off the rails, completely off the charts. And it's not like it's a super rare condition. Like, the majority of people don't have a mental illness that severely or impairs them, because that really is the diagnostic criteria, is how much does this affect the person's functioning. And with bipolar, it can really impair somebody if they're not medicated, like, at all, or medicated properly. So, which is why you hear stories of people who are going manic, and this whole superhero complex that people go through, where they think they're the best, and, they can do things better than professionals, and it's this high elation of superiority. Even if it's not malicious. It doesn't need to be malicious. It can just be a, what's the word? A grandiose sense of self, I think, is what I'm looking for. And when a person's not in that state, they realize, like, oh no, I'm not like that. But in that state, you don't think clearly. Same as when you're, bipolar depressed. Because from what I've experienced, because I've experienced just like general depression as well, it's different. It just is. There's something about bipolar depression that just kind of hits differently. Like, sometimes this is an unknowing. And depression just, there isn't a reason, if you're clinically depressed. Some things can, I think things can trigger depression. I have a forget psychology degree, but they don't talk about triggers very often, for some reason. But through experience, I've realized that it's easier to trigger somebody who has bipolar disorder compared to a depressive disorder, which is more heavily chemical based. But also, individuals with bipolar are very easy to set off. And it's you could call somebody like I'm autistic and I'm bipolar, like as a identifying characteristic of somebody because of how much it affects just your everyday life, even if you're medicated. Because temperament tends to be, you tend to be the fly off the handle more easily, be more sensitive to things. There are triggers that can affect you just in your environment, which can cause things like rapid cycling, which is a cycle that can last a few days to a few weeks, compared to a typical cycle, which usually lasts a few months. I think the longest I've ever been in, I think I've been in like a 3-month cycle before. And that was before I was medicated for my bipolar, and I was trying Adderall for my ADHD. And it triggered me into a mania, and then a depression, which was a hell of a time in your first semester at a university. So that was an interesting time, and that's a video of itself to talk about my first year at university, which was the first semester of my third year. So I'd been at junior college before that. But a little off track. I've been focusing very much on the now of it, and let's see how my personal experience with it. Like I said, I think yesterday is when I actually snapped out of my cycle. And I was really depressed for like a week. Before that, I felt pretty good. I might have been a little manic, but I suffer from bipolar type 2, which means the mania isn't as severe. It's down to a hypomania, which the difference between mania and hypomania is mania is superiority complex, just off the rails, where hypomania is more hyper-focused, hyper-fixated, super productive, like stuff like that. Where, yeah, you feel elevated, but it's not dangerous, per se. Spending is an issue, though. There's something about mania and wanting to spend money, which you gotta check yourself. As for the depression, it's still the same, if not worse. But yeah, bipolar 2 and bipolar 1 are different. There's, I think, another 2 or 3 classifications in the bipolar umbrella, but I'll have to get back to you with that information, because I don't remember exactly. But it kind of goes down in severity. It starts to be like, is this really like a bipolar diagnosis, or is it something else? Besides the point. My personal experience with it. I had about a 2-week cycle. This last week was really rough because it was my depression. And I think that's the lowest I've been in a really long time. And I don't know why. It's, it was the holidays and everything like that. I think around Thanksgiving is when I started dropping. I can't remember exactly. And it is a drop. And the thing with it is, you don't go from middle line to up, back down the middle line, to down. It doesn't work like that. It's a up to a down to a moderate. And sometimes it just goes up and down until you level out. But it is a pervasive part of your existence. And when I'm really depressed, I can't function. I was going through doing all this stuff, having all this energy, yada yada, to not being able to get out of bed, sleeping in the middle of the day, not being able to focus on anything. It just, everything went downhill. And there's certain things I could talk about, but they would be triggers, so I'm not going to talk about those. But it was really rough. And my worst day was the day before I snapped out of it, which I've also noticed as a habit. So it's really interesting when you go to bed with this during a depression, and then you wake up the next day and you're fine. Like, that's another really weird thing about bipolar, is how quickly it happens. And that's why it's such a volatile diagnosis. That's why bipolar people are so, like, volatile. It's because the mental illness itself can just, like, you could be literally talking to somebody, normal conversation, they can go into it. Because it's just how the chemicals work. Like, during this video, I could switch. Like, I could get thrown into a cycle for whatever reason. Because that's just how my brain works. And it's not fun. I've noticed usually with my cycles, it's a waking up thing. And I noticed it's worse when I can't sleep properly, which I blame my cat a little bit for that. Isn't that right? Can you see him? Yeah, he likes to knock stuff off my nightstand, but after I cleaned it off, I slept better. And it helped me snap out of it. Boop. But yeah, I don't know why I wanted to talk about it. I think it's because I just went through a bad cycle, and I think there's a lot of confusion about bipolar, because you also have people who confuse bipolar with BPD, borderline personality disorder. And because it's not the same thing. I don't know if you can have both. I've never heard of that dual diagnosis. But it wouldn't surprise me. But the thing is, BPD is a personality disorder. Bipolar is not. It's a pervasive part of somebody's life, but it's not a personality disorder. The difference between a mental disorder, mental illness, and a personality disorder is you can treat a mental disorder. Bipolar can be treated with medication and therapy. BPD doesn't work that way. It's a personality disorder. It's like narcissistic personality disorder or sociopathic, personalities. Antisocial personality disorder, like ODD for kids. It's not something that you can throw pills at. And you shouldn't throw pills at any medication. Like, there's treatment addition to pills. But BPD, bipolar, different, but their symptomology is very similar, with the erratic mood swings. And that's why they can get a little confused. But they're not, like, bipolar disorder, BPD, and then BPD. They literally have the same abbreviation. But they're two totally different diagnoses, just with similar symptoms. But totally different treatment. Like, somebody with BPD usually has comorbid diagnoses, which I've talked about before, comorbidity. And comorbidity, yeah. Stuff like that can be treated. You can have a personality disorder, but also suffer from, like, anxiety or depression or, whatever. That stuff can be treated. And treating those things helps the person cope, especially depending on the personality disorder. But again, I'm getting off track. That's another subject entirely. But again, bipolar can be treated with medication. BPD itself cannot. But still, it's very volatile. From what I understand, there's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstanding when it comes to bipolar, and I think that's also affected by the confusion with BPD. But people with bipolar they're not bad people because they're bipolar. You have bad people out there who, disabled people, people with mental illnesses, get off my phone, that are just shitty people. You're gonna get your bad eggs out there, no matter what. But mental illnesses, bipolar specifically, what we're talking about, doesn't inherently make you a bad person. it might make you seem like a bad person. When I'm, like, usually when I'm depressed in my depressive part of my cycle, I'm just a dick. Like, I'm not a good person. And when I'm manic, I don't care about other people's feelings, really. Like, I'm not inherently mean, but I already don't really have much of a filter to begin with. So you put hypomania on top of it, nothing. I just say whatever comes out of my mouth. Which is usually hysterical. But you need to think before you talk for the most part. That was not a good thing to... See, I've come to a point in my treatment where I can recognize when I'm doing things that aren't right. Excuse me, hiccups. I can recognize when I'm having, like, when I'm raising my voice. Because I know when I'm not cycling, I don't really raise my voice. Like, it takes a lot for me to, like, get loud. Sorry. And frustrated with somebody. I'm a fairly mellow person. And a fairly quiet person. So when I'm raising my voice and I feel like my frustration getting really bad, yeah, I know something's not right. When I go from being able to stay awake all day for the most part to not being able to get out of bed, I know something's wrong. I don't always correlate it with my bipolar, but a lot of the times that's if I'm going through a spike or this, like, irrationality, because it is being a bit irrational, and then you just drop down. Sometimes, as a bipolar person, you forget you have it while it's happening. Especially people who are manic, like, they don't realize they're, let's say, bonkers, okay? Because the interviews I have heard of people who are going through a manic episode, they're not on planet Earth, okay? They're somewhere else. And, like, you don't recognize it necessarily when it's happening. You just feel good. If somebody is medicated and they're going into a manic cycle, it's very possible they'll get off their meds. Because you feel good. You're like, why do I need my medication if I feel so good? So you go off your meds, your depression hits, then you're not on your meds, and everything gets worse. You just get completely thrown off. I've had times where I haven't wanted to take my medication. But it usually comes from a point of, I'm still experiencing these things, why do I even bother? Then I have to think about that really bad cycle that I had my university, because that's when my bipolar really, like, set in as an adult, was during that time. I already had bipolar, I was already cycling in high school, if not before that, but in high school for sure, and my cycles were longer, which, like, my cycles lasted almost a whole year, type of thing, like, which, let's just say about 3 months to 3 months. 6 months out of the year. I think it was more like I had like a 5 month to 5 month, like, cycle period. But I can't remember. I might have been a little delusional, which is also a thing, is being delusional, especially when you're up. High school was weird. I'll talk about that another day. But I was cycling since high school. I especially recognized it my past 2 years, or my last 2 years of high school. But I didn't have a diagnosis. I didn't have any diagnoses at the time. I was in therapy. I had been in therapy for years. Never diagnosed with anything. Besides, like, I went in there, I had anger issues and anxiety issues, but I didn't have any formal diagnoses. So when I got diagnosed with autism, I was also tested for ADHD. You know, just general diagnostic tests, IQ test, stuff like that. And I had been diagnosed with a predisposition to bipolar. So the doctor literally told me, hey, it is possible that you're going to develop this, so try not to stress yourself out. About 6 months later, I go to a huge university to start Adderall. Guess what happens? My bipolar explodes. So, long story. I'm literally just talking, and this video is getting very long. Um, and I don't know if I should stop, but I guess I'll end it at this note. What can you do for somebody who has bipolar that you know? And what can you do as a bipolar person? Try to get medicated if you're bipolar. And if you don't know if you are, try to get diagnosed. I know it can be scary, but it will do wonders for you if you get medicated. And get proper therapy, because that will help the stuff that the medication doesn't necessarily do, like anxiety. If you're going through a depression and you start getting anxious, then you can have the tools, even if you don't associate it with your bipolar. You can still treat with, like, handle the symptoms that go along with your cycle, even if it's tough. I can manage my anxiety pretty well. My depression's depression. So, it's just how chemicals in the brain work. Now, what do you do if you love somebody, or care about somebody, or just have a friend that has bipolar and is going through a cycle? What do you do? Well, I'm gonna be honest with you. When I was cycling my first year of university, there was nothing anybody could do. It was just what I was going through, what I was experiencing, and I was dating somebody at the time who was one of those fixer types, and we were dating when I had gone into a depressive episode. Like, right before I got into a depressive episode. And I had to tell him, like, hey, like, I know you want to help me, I know you want me to feel better, but I'm just not gonna feel better. I had understood that this was my bipolar at this point. I'd be like, hey, I know you're trying, but literally nothing you say or anything you do is going to make this go away. You just sort of have to be here for me and recognize that this will end, but just to be there, just to be supportive. Sometimes that's all you can do. Now, if somebody's in a manic state and they're doing stuff that's not okay, call them out on it. Especially if you have, like, a close relationship with the person. Like, if you don't know them too well, like, tread lightly. Because you can set off a manic person like that. They could be all happy and giddy, but the second you say something they don't like, they can turn on you like it's nothing. But again, when somebody's in a cycle, that's not really who they are. It's not like when you drink alcohol and kind of your true colors show. You know, it's not like that. Chemicals aren't real. Like, the chemicals in your brain do not bring out the best in somebody and do not bring out the real person. So that's important to remember. It's because you see somebody and they're going through a cycle, that does not mean who they really are. That's just what they're experiencing. But if you're close to somebody, at least close enough, and they're doing things that are dangerous, or they're being really mean and don't realize it, because they probably don't realize it, call them out on it. Like, don't be afraid to be like, hey, you're being an asshole. Stop it. You know, because they might not be able to, but at least they can recognize it. Like, we're not completely irrational, you know, for the most part. There's certain recognitions we can have, especially if we've been dealing with our diagnosis for a while. Like, hey, you're being a dick. Be like, how am I? Be like, hey, you have a harsh tone, or you're saying things that you wouldn't normally say. Like, just be aware. I'll remind you when you do it. And hopefully you're talking to somebody who's like, okay, you're right, I'm sorry, you know. When somebody's depressed, be there for them. Check up on them, even if they don't want to talk. Just be like, hey, I'm just checking in, make sure you're still alive, you know, and like, did you eat today? Did you drink some water? Have you taken your pills? Like, simple stuff like that. And if they respond, that's good. Sometimes people don't want to respond. But if you, like, if the first text you send is something like, did you drink water? Did you eat? You know, a simple yes or no question. That will help. Because you're not pinning somebody into a corner of conversation. Which, when somebody's depressed, they don't want. I get really reclusive when I'm depressed. I don't want to talk to anybody. There might be one person I associate with and have a few text messages, and then I'll just, like, disappear off the face of the earth. And this can be a few weeks where I don't talk to, like, the people I'm dating, you know? And luckily, I'm currently with people who are understanding. Well, yeah. So, it's just something to be aware of if you're talking with somebody who's bipolar and they sort of just, like, drop off. Like, ask them yes or no questions. Really simple stuff, like you're gonna be like, you're going through a hard time, like, saying, like, are you okay? They're gonna answer with, like, a, yeah, I'm fine, you know? But saying stuff like, did you sleep last night? Are you going through a rough time? Or, you know, just don't make the person feel pressured. And just, I don't know. Like, I know, but I don't know. Like, I didn't realize I had this much to say about it. But if... just try to be aware of the behaviors. I guess... this literally brought up because I was going to talk about my depressive cycle. But I made it through. It ended abruptly. That's how I knew what it was. So just, like I was saying, support your bipolar compatriots. Try to be patient and understanding. Call them out if you need to. If somebody seems on the depressive side, be nice about it. Because I know when I'm really depressed, I have what I call my bad thoughts, which are, you can kind of, like, assume what my bad thoughts are. But my bad thoughts. And I know they're just bad impulsive thoughts, and I know they're because of my chemicals. But I also know that they're not okay, and I shouldn't be experiencing them. So, just be aware of that. If somebody's a little too in the satirical humor, like, check on them. And bipolar affects about 2.4 to 2.9 of the general population. And it affects men and women almost equally. I think men are slightly more affected, but, like, by 0.2%. So, like, it's nothing. So anybody could have bipolar. Which means off the spectrum as well. You know, it's just statistics are usually men and women. So 2.4% of the population, equal split between the two. And yeah, just, I don't want to say be cautious, but be aware and understanding and educate yourself. I mean, I gave a decent amount of information. I think probably too much information in this video. But there's always more research to be had. Even if it's general, like, WebMD, like, basic shit. It works. You know, just something. I dated a schizophrenic before. I didn't know what to do. I didn't research on it. It helped. So, just be understanding of your friends. Do research if you need to. And, you know, if you suffer from bipolar as well, just try to sleep, eat, drink water, and take your pills. Like, the basic necessities of what you need to do. Just, you know, try to use the time between your cycles to manage, you know, and get a plan. So if you go through a cycle, you break these habits, but you establish the habits beforehand, you can jump back on it. Because your bipolar, your cycles, is not who you are. It's just something that's happening to you. So I'm gonna end it there before I ramble on anymore. So I hope everybody's doing okay in these crazy times. I know that doesn't help anybody's mental illnesses at all. And, you know, be safe. Talk to somebody if you need to. Make sure you take care of yourself, take your meds, and just try to be the best person to you that you can. So, good night. Love y'all. Thanks for listening to this long ass video. Okay, bye.